If you clicked on this video, then I'm sure you remember this bald-headed pixelated teacher who followed you around with a ruler many years ago. Chances are you haven't seen this familiar face in a long time, even though it was getting hundreds of millions of views across the world in its heyday. Today, I'm going to be talking about what happened to Baldy's basics to cause it to fall off and disappear off of the face of the planet, and why that may actually be a good thing. If you enjoy videos like this, a like and sub would be truly appreciated, and let's get on to the video. Baldy's Basics in Education and Learning was created in 2018 by a person named Micah McGonigal, I hope I pronounced that right, as an entry in the 2018 Meta Game Jam. A Game Jam is a limited time event where developers compete to create a video game from scratch in a short amount of time. This Game Jam specifically was about creating a meta game, which basically means games that are aware that they are games. That might not make too much sense, but it's basically a game with one of these following requirements. Micah ended up submitting the game just 26 minutes and 55 seconds before the deadline for the Game Jam and ended up achieving second place. And even though he ended up not winning the Game Jam, his game skyrocketed in popularity, while the game that won first place, Farfail OS, never really got any attention outside of the Game Jam. Baldy's Basics ended up getting over 10,000 downloads around a month after the Game Jam, and so the creator made a Reddit post asking if it would be a good idea to make a Kickstarter page to fund the development of turning the Game Jam entry into a full game. People thought it would be a good idea, and so the Kickstarter began with a goal of raising $50,000. It began on July 24th, 2018, and it would end up surpassing the goal with over 2,000 backers pledging over $60,000 by August 23rd, 2018, so he surpassed his goal in just under a month. This was all happening around the time that the game began blowing up on YouTube, and it's a big part of why the Kickstarter campaign reached its goal so quickly. YouTubers like Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, and Didnt were making videos on the game, leading the game to explode in popularity seemingly overnight. But the success of the game isn't just owed to big YouTubers making videos about it. The game itself was great. It was super unique and had that old school retro look before it was popular to have. It was made to emulate the look of old edutainment games from the 90s like Sonic Schoolhouse, which are basically games made for kids to learn. But Micah ended up adding a horror twist to it, which you probably already know. It wasn't just your run-of-the-mill horror game though, it was chaotic and unpredictable. The characters were unique and the voice acting was gotta sweep! Interesting. The game was perfect for content, even though the main focus of making the game was trying to win a game jam. People fell in love with the game so much that they just wanted more. And that's where we reach our first problem. The version of the game that blew up all over the internet wasn't meant to be a full game. It was a game jam project made in just a few days. It wasn't really polished and had barely any content. It was basically just a demo. Despite this, millions of people loved the game and their expectations were high. They wanted to see even more content about their favorite bald-headed teacher, but unfortunately the demand was way higher than the supply. Baldy's Basics was created by one single developer, and if you know anything about game development, then you know that indie game studios take a long time to put out new updates, especially when it's just one dude making them. The first couple months after the game's release saw quick bug fixes and small tweaks releasing every few days, and bigger additions would take a few weeks to maybe a couple of months. But when the Kickstarter came into existence and there was now the promise of a full Baldy's Basics game, attention shifted from the Game Jam version, which is now known as Baldy's Basics Classic, and was now more focused on the full game, which was going to be named Baldy's Basics Plus. Expectations were high. People had now invested real-world money into what was once a simple demo, and now they were waiting for a fully fledged version of the game to release. Baldy's Basics Classic received its last major update in November 2018 with version 1.4, because development for Baldy's Basics Plus had now begun. There was a time when Baldy was absolutely everywhere on YouTube. You couldn't open the app without seeing him on your homepage, but that kind of popularity doesn't last forever. Once YouTubers had played through the game and squeezed all the content they could out of it, there just wasn't much left to cover, and so they moved on. And because Baldy's success was so heavily tied to YouTube, it started fading from the mainstream almost as quickly as it blew up. A dedicated fanbase still stuck around, but for most people, Baldy just kind of disappeared. beard. Even though most people thought Baldy was finished, the developer was working on something much bigger. Fast forward to June 12th of 2020, and we received the first ever version of Baldy's Basics Plus, version 0.1. Baldy's Basics Plus introduced new features like procedural generation, new characters, and the game was completely overhauled in general. Everything that people wanted to be added to Classic was now being added to Plus instead. It was going to be the definitive version of Baldy's Basics. And while most people thought that Baldy had already given everything it had to offer, the developer was grinding in the background, working on updates for the game and trying to perfect it just as he had promised in the Kickstarter campaign. While the mainstream's attention diverted from Baldy onto other horror games, the developer did not divert his attention, and instead he was fully focused on delivering on his promise and staying true to his word. And that's... Now, you read the title and are probably wondering why Baldy's falloff would ever be considered a good thing. And well, let me explain. Most games that blow up to the extent that Baldy did usually don't end very well. The popularity ends up getting to the developers' heads and they begin pumping out updates or sequels like no other. Even though the quality of these updates or sequels may be downgraded, they don't care and opt to get as much out there as possible in order to stay relevant. In the process of pumping out all of these updates, they end up losing sight of what actually made their game special. A prime example of this, in my opinion, is Hello Neighbor. The first few alpha builds of Hello Neighbor were amazing and super unique, but then they began releasing more and more updates that made the game feel less like Hello Neighbor and just made it way too confusing in general. The game's initial spike in popularity got to their heads and they forgot what their game was supposed to be about. By the time the game released, it was just a shell of what it once was. But Baldy didn't make this mistake. The developer knew that Baldy's Classic was only ever going to be a demo, and instead of rushing and adding a bunch of half-baked updates to a half-finished game, he opted to rework it and produce a fully fledged game, even if that meant that it would take years of consistent development. The developer slowed everything down and decided to go with quality over quantity, and that's why many people look back at Baldy's Basics very fondly. It didn't get overused or burnt out, it just simply came and went. Baldy's Basics had a graceful fall off that kept the door open to future releases. I also want to point out that Baldy's Basics Classic and Classic Remastered are still free to play to this day, and Baldy's Basics Plus only costs $10 to buy. Only $10, and 8 years of development went into the game. Baldy's Basics Plus version 1.0 will be the final major update of Baldy's Basics Plus and will likely come out later this year or early next year, and it'll be the culmination of that 8 years of consistent development, and I think it'll really be something special. And as I said before, there is still a dedicated fan base to Baldy's Basics, and the developer makes regular announcements regarding the progress of the game's development. And honestly, compared to the rest of the indie games that came out 8 to 10 years ago, this seems to be one of the healthiest ones. The fan base is still decently sized, and even though the mainstream kind of forgot about it, there is still so much room for Baldy's Basics to come back in. So let me know if you're excited to play the full release of Baldy's Basics Plus. That's all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, a like and sub would be truly appreciated, and comment down below what type of video you'd like to see next. See ya!